Queen said, "I won't knight you in those clothes." Here's Ozzy Osbourne's response. Morning light poured through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace, washing the marble corridors in a muted gold that seemed older than time. Outside, London breathed beneath a pale winter sky, the hum of distant traffic softened by the palace's thick walls. Inside, a world of precision moved like clockwork. Polished shoes clicked on marble floors. Footmen exchanged hushed greetings, and maids hurried past portraits of monarchs who had shaped centuries. In the midst of this elegance, Queen Elizabeth II sat by the window of her private study, the one facing the East Garden. Her teacup, porcelain and perfectly white, rested on a gold-rimmed saucer. Steam curled into the air, vanishing like the thoughts she had not yet spoken. The Queen was a woman who had seen wars, revolutions, and the rise of the digital age. Yet she knew that the most dangerous changes were often the quiet ones, those that arrived disguised as small decisions. That morning, one such decision awaited her on her desk. A thick folder marked "Knighthood Ceremony, Confidential" lay open before her, the cream pages edged with red wax. Her fingers, steady as ever, turned one page after another, names of scientists, philanthropists, poets, until her eyes fell upon one that made her pause. John Michael Osbourne. She read the name again, whispering softly under her breath. Osbourne. Yes, the musician. From somewhere in her memory she recalled the faint echo of a headline. The Prince of Darkness, they had called him. A figure who had terrified parents and thrilled teenagers. A man whose voice had thundered from amplifiers and whose lyrics had haunted stadiums. Her lips formed a line of mild amusement. The world does change, doesn't it? She thought. To knight a man once condemned as the face of rebellion, what would her father have said? What would Churchill have said? At that moment, a soft knock sounded. "Enter," she said. Lady Margaret Thornbury, the Queen's long-serving private secretary, stepped in. Her posture was flawless, her expression the embodiment of British restraint. A pair of spectacles balanced on her nose, and in her arms she carried more files than one could reasonably read in a day. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Lady Margaret said, curtsying with mechanical grace. "The briefing for the ceremony, ma'am." "Ah, yes." The Queen gestured toward the folder. "This Mr. Osbourne, what do we know of him?" Lady Margaret adjusted her glasses and opened a separate file. Inside were photographs, concert posters, charity reports, press clippings, and somewhere near the bottom, a handful of tabloid images. Ozzy on stage, arms outstretched before a roaring crowd. Ozzy laughing beside his wife Sharon on the red carpet. Ozzy wearing in every photo his unmistakable uniform of black jeans, leather, and heavy chains. "Your Majesty," Lady Margaret began, her tone delicate but firm, "Mr. Osbourne is a renowned musician. His band, Black Sabbath, is credited with inventing the heavy metal genre. He has since released numerous successful solo albums and is regarded as one of the most influential figures in modern music. However," she hesitated, "he is also known for, shall we say, his disregard for conventional decorum." The Queen arched an eyebrow. "Decorum, Margaret, or sanity?" Lady Margaret's lips pressed together in a small, nervous smile. "Perhaps both, ma'am. Though he has mellowed in recent years, the press remains attentive. The challenge, I fear, may lie in persuading him to respect palace protocol." "Protocol," the Queen repeated softly, letting the word linger in the still air. It was both her armor and her burden. "And what is the concern?" Lady Margaret laid out a series of glossy photographs on the oak desk. "These, ma'am, are his most recent public appearances." The Queen leaned forward, examining them one by one. Torn jeans. A shirt bearing the emblem Black Sabbath 1970, the birth of metal. A long black coat with patches of age and memory. A crucifix hanging loosely from his neck. "He dresses," Lady Margaret said carefully, "as though every day were a concert. We cannot, ma'am, allow such informality in the presence of the crown." For a long moment the Queen said nothing. She looked again at the photo, not at the clothes, but at the eyes. There was something there, a sincerity perhaps, that defied the chaos of his image. "You know, Margaret," she finally said, "I once shook hands with the Beatles. That caused quite the stir as well." "Yes, ma'am, but the Beatles wore suits," Lady Margaret replied promptly, almost apologetically. The Queen smiled faintly. "Indeed they did." Silence hung between them for several seconds. The ticking of the antique clock filled the room like a heartbeat. Then the Queen leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the window where London stretched endlessly outward, a city that had learned to love its misfits. "Margaret," she said, "prepare a letter for Mr. Osborne's management. A courteous reminder of our expectations regarding attire. State clearly that the knighthood ceremony is a sacred tradition of the Crown and that the dignity of the event must be upheld." "Yes, Your Majesty," Lady Margaret said, relief flickering across her face. "Shall I include a note about possible postponement in case of non-compliance?" The Queen hesitated. "Yes, let it be known that the Crown does not bend easily." Then softer, as if speaking only to herself, she added, "Though sometimes perhaps it should." Lady Margaret did not catch the final words. She gathered her files, bowed, and left the room. When the door closed, the Queen remained still, gazing at the photographs spread across the desk. A leather jacket against gold silk wallpaper, a working-class rebel among aristocrats. For the first time that morning, the Queen felt a strange unease, and an even stranger curiosity. Who was this man who made the world call him dark, yet spoke so vividly of love and pain? Outside, the clouds parted, letting a shaft of light fall directly across the name on the paper, John Michael Osborne. The Queen lifted her teacup, her reflection mirrored faintly in its surface, and whispered, almost smiling, "Let us see, Mr. Osborne. If the Crown can still surprise itself." By late afternoon, Beverly Hills had the soft, washed-out look of a city after a long sigh. Palms stood straight as metronomes along the boulevard, their crowns whispering to the wind. In a quiet canyon just far enough from traffic to hear birdsong, the Osborne house rested behind a gate that had learned to be patient with photographers. The stucco glowed a gentle ivory. The ironwork gleamed. Roses climbed the trellis like musical notes trying to reach a final chorus they would never quite touch. Inside, the air carried the everyday symphony of a home. Faint guitar from a room upstairs, a kettle beginning to mutter on the stove, the hum of a refrigerator, and woven through all of it, the soft thump-thump of dogs choosing which patch of sunlight belonged to them. Sharon Osbourne, sleeves rolled up, was sorting the post at the long kitchen island. A pile of envelopes arrayed like a losing hand at cards. A charity gala invitation. The inevitable bills, something handwritten from a friend. And then an envelope unlike the others. Heavy, cream, its edges edged with a sobriety that announced itself. In the top corner, a crest, the royal seal, bold as a held gaze. Sharon's eyebrows rose. "Well, hello," she said to no one, rolling the weight of it in her palm. The kettle hissed toward urgency. She set the letter down, turned off the flame, and poured water over waiting tea bags, the steam curling up like a question she hadn't yet asked. "Ozzy," she called, her voice stretched up the stairwell with the easy authority of history and love. "Darling, post has delivered you a crown." From the library came a muffled reply. "A what?" "Something from Buckingham Palace," she said, quickening toward laughter and alarm in equal measure. A beat. Then the shuffle of footsteps, the soft clink of a mug set aside, the familiar rhythm of him moving through the house, slower now than in the days of high tour and hard rain, but with that same quiet immediacy, as if at any moment he might either hug the world or dare it to take a swing. He entered the kitchen in a black cardigan, a t-shirt faded to the perfect shade that only years and arenas can teach fabric to wear, and jeans that knew the shape of his knees. A silver cross rested against his chest. His hair fell to his shoulders in a loose spill that obeyed neither comb nor clock. His eyes, those good eyes, were steady and curious. "This one," Sharon said, tapping the envelope as she slid a mug toward him. "Your Majesty has written." Ozzy's smile creased into something boyish. "Blimey," he said, drawing out the vowel just enough to admit he was both joking and a little bit stunned. "Did I forget to pay a parking ticket in 1973? Sharon peeled at the seal with a careful thumb. "Behave," she said, but she was grinning. She slid the parchment free. The paper had a dignified heft. It made the usual mail feel like gossip. She read. Her face changed almost imperceptibly, humor pulling back to let caution step forward, then annoyance shooing caution aside. Then the managerial steel she kept near her heart for moments just like this. "Ozzy," she said, more softly now. "It's the formal notice. The knighthood." A flicker of pride lit her voice, warm as a hearth. "They're confirming ceremony details." And she inhaled. "They have expectations regarding attire." He took the letter and scanned. A dark suit, a white shirt, a tie that did nothing but obey, shoes that reflected rules, a paragraph reminding him of the sanctity of tradition. Another paragraph that said, with elegant sentences, that the ceremony could be postponed if expectations were not met. Words like dignity and decorum and established protocol stood shoulder to shoulder across the page like a row of solemn portraits. He placed the letter down on the marble and looked out through the glass to the terrace, where a lemon tree breathed its sweet, sharp scent into the afternoon. When he spoke, his voice carried the softness of freshly poured tea and the gravel of 1,000 stages. "So they want me in costume," he said. Sharon leaned a hip against the island and folded her arms. "They want you in a suit, my love," which, for 99% of the planet, is not a costume. He pressed his palm over the crest at the top of the page, not hard, just enough to feel the emboss beneath his skin. "If the day is about honor," he said, "why would it start with asking me to be someone else?" "Because the palace is the palace," Sharon replied, a diplomat's patience shading her words. "They've got centuries stacked in those rooms like books. Every one of them comes with dust you're not supposed to move." Ozzy breathed out a small laugh. "You can dust a room," he said. "You can't dust a life." Silence arrived, generous and unafraid. The dogs wandered, sighed, and fell to snoring. A ray of light slipped across the table and laid itself over the letter as if curious too. He picked up his mug, let the steam kiss his face, and set it down without drinking. "Shaz," he said. And even now, all these years later, the nickname made her glance up with that look, the one that said, "We are us." "I grew up wearing what we could afford. Then I wore what made me brave. Then I wore what reminded me who I was when the noise got bigger than the man. That jacket, these boots, they're the map I carried when the rooms got too big and the people too loud. I can't walk into that palace carrying a map that isn't mine." Sharon stepped around the island and stood in front of him. "And you won't," she said. "No one will ever change the spine you were born with. But there's also strategy." She tilted her head, a glint of her old television ferocity in her smile. "Sometimes you dress the part to deliver the punchline." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I'm not a punchline. You're a headline," she said, touching the edge of the letter, "and they know it, which is why they're trying to put the frame on the picture before you arrive." He braced his hands on the counter. His fingers, blunt and honest, tapped once, twice, as if keeping time to a song he hadn't yet decided to sing. What if the frame hides the edges that matter? Evening turned the canyon violet. House lights came on. In the studio at the back, the room that had a smell like sawdust and electricity, the room where songs were coaxed out of silence, Ozzy stood with a guitar in his hands but wasn't playing. The instrument hung against him like a longer thought. He remembered, with the accuracy of ache, the cold Birmingham mornings. His dad's boots by the door, heavy with work. His mum's hands chapped from water that had known too much soap. The city had a gray that got under the nails. Men came home from the factory with silence for dinner. Women folded other people's sheets and learned to fold their own anger into the corners. School had not wanted him. Letters leapt and landed in the wrong place. Teachers' voices became static. He'd been a boy with a stutter who learned that noise. Could be armor and art could be a door if you kicked at it long enough with the right friends beside you. He remembered the abattoir, the smell that clung to skin and nightmares alike. He remembered sweeping floors in shops that sold things he could not afford. He remembered the small, narrow currency of dignity, how a single coin of respect could buy a whole day of light. Then, a room with cheap amps and better intentions. Tony's riffs like factory steel turned to lightning. Geezer's bass a heartbeat under a city. Bill's drums a prophecy. And him, inside it all, throwing his voice at the dark until it blinked. Black Sabbath wasn't just a band. It was relief. It was four lads saying to the world, "We know your shadow. We've walked in it. We're not scared of telling you it's there." He set the guitar down and moved to the shelves where he kept mementos. Passes on lanyards like old prayers. A set list from a night he'd thought would kill him and didn't. A photo of him and Sharon when the future still had its plastic wrapper. He reached for a leather jacket whose sleeves were frayed where hands and years had insisted. The jacket smelled like airports and rain on cables. Like cigarettes he no longer smoked and rooms he'd lived in for 6 weeks at a time. He ran a thumb over a nick in the lapel. If you held that jacket up to the light just so, you could read a map of the places it had been. Tokyo in a squall. A meet and greet where a kid had cried and said the music kept him alive. A hospital hallway outside a room where someone he loved was trying not to die. A backstage stairwell where he'd sat for an entire hour because the enormity of gratitude had been heavier than gravity. He put the jacket on. It settled over him with the rightness particular to tools and second skins. Sharon appeared in the doorway, leaning a shoulder to the jamb, watching without interrupting. She had known this man when the world couldn't decide if it wanted to worship him or put him out with yesterday's papers. She had fought for him when he was too tired to fight for himself, when the headlines lied and when they didn't. Heavy, she said, nodding to the coat. Like a crown, he answered. She smiled and the room remembered to breathe. I never wanted a tiara, she said. I wanted a sword. He laughed properly now. That you did. She crossed to him and straightened the collar, fingers lingering at the seam. Let's run the choices, she said, pragmatic again. Option 1, we play it safe. Tailor tux, you look like you're going to scare a hedge fund. Option 2, we ignore the letter, and you turn up exactly as you are, and we see whether tradition has learned to dance. He held her gaze. Option 1 feels like telling the boy I was to wait outside. And option 2? She asked. He looked past her to the window, where the canyon was learning how to be night. Option 2 is walking in with every kid who ever thought the door wasn't for them. Every factory worker, every lad who got told his hands weren't the right kind of clean. She stepped back, studied his face, lines that had earned their keep, eyes that had forgiven the world more than once. You know the press will make sport of it, she said, not to turn him but to steady him. Some will call it disrespect. Some will pretend it's a stunt, he nodded. They've called me worse, he said, and the shadow of a grin sharpened. And better. Sharon looked down at the letter, now lying on the studio table beneath a paperweight shaped like a lion. Dignity, decorum, protocol. The words were good words, she thought. They were also blunt instruments in the wrong hands. She could feel the pull between her instincts, to protect him from noise. To honor a place that had, however slowly, recognized what he had done for people he would never meet. Tell me the truth, Ozzy, she said. If you put the suit on, will you feel like yourself? He took time with the answer. Not for drama, but so the words wouldn't be lighter than the question. I'll feel like I'm borrowing a story, he said. And I'll give it back at the end of the day, and everyone will say it was lovely. But I won't remember the ceremony in my bones. What if you walk in wearing this? She touched the jacket again. And she sends you away. He smiled with a tenderness he saved for the hardest mornings. Then we go home, he said. To the life we built that needs no sword to bless it. Sharon's mouth softened. She kissed him on the cheek and left her hand there for a moment, a benediction more than a gesture. Whatever you choose, she said, choose it loud. Later, dinner half-eaten because nerves taste bigger than food, they walked the garden under string lights that looked like constellations anyone could reach. The night air had that California sweetness, jasmine and orange blossom, and the silver of the moon. Somewhere far below, a siren threaded its lonely way through the city. Ozzy told her a story he had kept short for years, about a boy on a narrow street who had looked through a shop window at a suit that shone like a promise, about saving coins in a jar, about finally trying the jacket on and seeing a stranger in the mirror who could walk into any room and ask for a chair, about the day he realized he didn't want a chair in that room. He wanted to build another room, with a door that didn't require anyone to borrow a face. You never told me that, Sharon said, not accusing, just adjusting the furniture of what she knew so it still fit. I didn't know it meant anything, he said. Now it does. They paused by the lemon tree. The fruit were small suns. He plucked one, rolled it in his palm, set it back, as if reassured to leave light where it grew. Sometimes, Sharon said, the world needs to see a thing to know it's possible. He looked at her, then at the house that had been a circus and a sanctuary, sometimes in the same hour. Then let them see, he said. They returned inside. He went to the wardrobe that held the suit. There was always one, for funerals and courts and moments when the world refused to be casual. He touched it, a prayer without words, and let the black wool slip back into shadow. On the nightstand beside the bed, he placed the letter from the palace beneath a small photograph. Two young faces, backstage, sweat bright and giddy. He turned off the lamp. In the dark, words found him with the ease of old friends. If I must betray myself to be honored, I'd rather stay forgotten. The sentence didn't feel like defiance. It felt like relief. He slept, not easily, but honestly. Dreams unspooled, a factory whistle, an empty stage bathed in blue, a corridor that led to a door that led to a room where the queen was waiting, not as a monarch, but as a woman who had learned to ask new questions. Morning snuck in polite as a butler. Ozzy rose, pulled on sweatpants and the t-shirt that knew how to forgive coffee, and padded to the kitchen. He set the kettle humming. The dogs announced opinions about breakfast and were obeyed. When Sharon arrived, barefoot, hair in the practical rebellion of sleep, she found a second mug waiting. He lifted his eyes. No words yet. Words were expensive first thing. She touched the crown of his head and kissed it the way she always had, like striking a match. "And?" she asked gently. "And," he said, "I'm going as me." She nodded once, a general acknowledging a soldier who had chosen the hill he would keep. "Then we should let them know." She drafted the reply with the tidy violence she kept for contracts and unkindness. "Thank you for your letter. Sir Osbourne will be honored to attend the knighthood ceremony. He will, of course, conduct himself with the utmost respect for the crown and the occasion. Regarding attire, Sir Osbourne will present as himself, black formal coat, black trousers, black shirt, without deviation from the authenticity that has defined his public service in music and charity for over 5 decades. She paused, looked up. "Too much?" she asked. "Perfect," he said. "Kind, clear." She added one more sentence. "He looks forward to a day worthy of the generations who taught him the meaning of dignity." They read it together. It felt like a bridge built without lying about the river. Sharon hit send. Ozzy lifted his mug, and this time he drank. The tea did the trick it always did, reminded the brain that the heart had already made its decision. He went to the studio. The jacket was waiting. He slipped it on. The weight settled. He breathed once through the nose, that old pre-show breath, and let the smallest smile take his mouth. "All right then," he told the room, to the ghosts, to the boy from Birmingham, to the future that would open or not. Let's see if voices of darkness can be heard in a room full of portraits. From somewhere deep in the house, a phone chimed, Sharon's email confirming transmission. The dogs barked at nothing and everything. The day stepped forward. Outside, the lemons ripened. Inside, across a continent and an ocean from a palace that had built its bones of ceremony, a man chose a coat that had learned the shape of him by listening, and somewhere in London a private secretary was about to frown at a sentence she could not sheath with protocol, and a queen was about to feel, for the first time in a very long time, the pleasant danger of surprise.